WCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to Weekend Review for Monday, January 27th, 2020. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. This episode is sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit. For tickets, visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. Well, Jim, our game of the week this past weekend did not disappoint, and actually it ended up being a weekend split in the two-game series. Friday's game of the week, number 11 Duluth, with a pretty convincing 7-4 win over North Dakota. North Dakota made a comeback attempt late in that game, but then Duluth's seventh goal really salted it away. A 3-2 win for North Dakota on Saturday night in Duluth. And a side note on that, on Saturday, Hunter Shepard, 105th straight start in net, beating Ben Scriven's record of 104 that he set a few years ago with Cornell. But what about that weekend?
Well, it was kind of what I expected. You know, I was really pleased to see Minnesota Duluth put forward a real great effort on Friday night. They fell behind 3-1 in that game, and then ended up scoring six of the final seven goals in the game. And their response after North Dakota tried to jump back into the game, they scored to make it, I guess it was 6-4 with about 10, 12 minutes left. And I think it was 35 seconds later, Duluth comes right back down, 7-4, lights out. A great start to that series. North Dakota, though, they're showing why they are, you know, a lot of people's number one or number two in the poll right now. Bounce back win on the road, had to fight tooth and nail for that win on Saturday night. So a good job, I thought, really by both teams. Each team showed why they deserve the national respect at this point. And I think that you really see two of the top teams in the NCHC right now. They played a very heavyweight series over the weekend. Each one of them gets the win. I would not be surprised to see these two teams play again sometime down the road in the playoffs.
I think you're right on that one. Every other weekend series was a sweep in the NCHC. The only team in the top 20 to sweep was number 5 Denver over Miami. Denver now has the longest unbeaten streak in the country at 8-0-3. Omaha swept Colorado College. Western Michigan swept St. Cloud State. So things are still pretty tight in the standings in the NCHC, although a bit of a gap for North Dakota at the top.
Yeah, and I guess you kind of maybe glanced over what is a big headline there, that Denver's sweep was the only top 20 team to sweep in the entire country this weekend. The teams that were off this weekend probably are the ones that are saying, boy, glad we weren't playing, because this was just a bad weekend to be one of the top teams in college hockey. But for those three teams inside the NCHC, each one of those gives themselves better position in the standings. Although I think that those standings are still pretty tight. I think there's a lot of battles that will go on for both maybe the top spot, the number one overall seed, and that 4 or 5 spot for that home ice spot.
Well, and in the USCHO.com poll today, it's going to be interesting as we get into it with a split for Minnesota State and a win and a tie for Cornell, who's going to be number one. Well, why don't we move on through some of those other leagues? Since I mentioned Minnesota State, the WCHA, Bemidji got the split at Minnesota State, but because of the split, they are still chasing Minnesota State for the top of that league.
Yeah, you come into the weekend knowing that if you sweep the weekend, you're right there in first place, tied for first place. Unfortunately, they did not do that. They got the split. And listen, an admirable split, especially because they lost the front end of that series 3-2. So to come back the next night on the road and get a 4-2 victory, I think that was a very poignant win, really, for Bemidji State. They're showing that they belong. I think a lot of people wondered if that was a Bemidji State team that was good enough. I think they should garner a lot of votes in this week's poll. But they've proved themselves that they belong, and they are right there in the second place. It is still a very uphill climb. I think of the 6 leagues, the league that I expect to be clinched first is the WCHA, and I expect Minnesota State to be able to do that.
Another matchup in that league, Northern Michigan got 5 of 6 points at Alaska, leapfrogged Alaska in the standings, but Alaska's still in the top 4. a very good season thus far in the conference for them.
Yeah, it certainly is. And obviously they'd like a little bit better fate out of this weekend. But we know how well Northern has played of late. They're one of the better teams in that league. And I think you've just kind of talked about four teams that are right there in the mix. There are going to be four very good teams that will be likely in the position to host first round series. It's a quarterfinal series in that league. And I think that's a big advantage when you're able to get that top four position in the league like the WCHA or Hockey East, where you're eliminating some of the teams that will be participating in the playoffs. It leaves only 8 teams out of 11 in Hockey East, 10 in the WCHA. And because of that, that 8th place team is a little bit better than a last place team. And that, you'd rather be in a home ice position if you're going to be battling a 4-5 or a 3-6 in both of those leagues.
Well, as we look at the Big Ten, you want to talk about a jumble. You got 5 teams all vying for the top of that league. Nobody setting any distance in there, rather, and nobody above 600 in winning percentage in conference. That was a crazy weekend. The big news out of that, I think, is Minnesota visiting number 6 Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. That's an absolute huge weekend for Minnesota. Not only does it give them a lot of confidence the way that they're playing right now, but it also positions them. They were in a position that, you get swept this weekend, you can kind of forget about even being in a home ice spot in the playoffs. Forget about a position where you could maybe be the number 1 overall seed and get a bye. But they're now only 6 points out of first place. That's in the Big Ten terms. That is just 2 games. Now they have to do a lot of leapfrogging. Michigan State and Penn State with 28 points, Ohio State with 26 points, Notre Dame with 23, and then Minnesota down there in 5th with 22. But you're still right there, and you've got games in hand on Notre Dame. You've got some, possibilities. You have the confidence that you've beat Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State. They've both been playing well, but they both are out there probably for the taking. So if you're Minnesota, you finally got that confidence. You maybe have some of that momentum that you hope to get from way back at the beginning of the season. You've got that going now. Can you keep going with it? Can you capitalize? Can the momentum keep heading in the right direction? That's the big question for Bob Mosko's crew.
Well, it's going to be a big question for Danton Cole at Michigan State. A split on the weekend with Penn State, number 19 Spartans and number 9 Nittany Lions. They're tied for first place, as you mentioned. And then Wisconsin and Notre Dame split on the weekend. Notre Dame salvaging a Saturday split to keep them in contention and to get their overall record back up to 500. We've talked about the woes of Notre Dame and the inconsistency of Wisconsin, and I guess both were on display.
That's true. Coming back for Notre Dame to win that game on Saturday probably feels big for Jeff Jackson. I saw some quotes from after Friday's game where, almost as if to say, I feel like this team has potential to be good, and I feel like this team is playing horribly at the same time. And it wasn't, that was not the words that he used, but kind of paraphrasing kind of the overall thought. I don't know that they're going to make any sort of headway at this point. As I mentioned, they're in 4th place. But, just to get a win and find, some joy in the locker room again has to be big for Notre Dame. And Wisconsin, they've become the team over the last few weeks that splits. They lost a lot of games early on, and that's why they're in last place. Since then, they've been splitting. And as you mentioned, there's not a lot of teams over 500 in the Big Ten. So if you were just splitting all along, Wisconsin would be in great position. Their early start put them behind the 8 ball, and splits aren't going to do much for them. They're probably destined to finish in one of the bottom 2 spots in the league. But I guess to get a win probably feels good on Friday. You wish you would have been able to close out that series, but you take what you can get at this point.
Well, it was a light schedule in the ECAC, a crazy one in Hockey East, and a weekend of 5 sweeps in Atlantic hockey. We'll get to those in a moment. First, a word from our sponsor, the NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online.
Every time you show up, every time you make your presence heard, whether you clap your hands or stomp your feet, lead the chant or join the chorus. However you choose to be a fan, you make the game. The NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th at Little Caesars Arena in Detroit. Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 to get your tickets today.
Continuing with Weekend Review, I'm Ed Trefzger with Jim Connelly. Jim, in the ECAC, only 2 league series underway last weekend, as most of the league had either non-conference play or was off. Harvard came into Colgate and Cornell, the Western New York swing, and Harvard tied both nights. Dartmouth had a loss to Cornell and a tie with Colgate, so nobody came out of it unblemished. What do you make of that whole scenario?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, you're talking about, basically the top 4 teams that were playing. Clarkson, obviously, they played some non-conference games against Arizona State on the weekend. But then the next 4 teams in the standings basically all played this kind of round robin, if you will. Obviously, you couldn't face all of them off against each other. But, Harvard and Dartmouth playing both Cornell and Colgate. I like the way that Cornell came out of that weekend. The fact that they were able to get the 3 points. They're the only team that did that. You had, Harvard in a situation where they'll probably take those 2 ties. They would have liked to have turned one into a win, but that at least keeps them relevant in the conversation. At Dartmouth, they stay kind of right in that position where they're relevant. But Colgate and everybody below them is slowly slipped. And you would think that Colgate, Quinnipiac, maybe they are in an okay position because they have a lot of games in hand on both Harvard and Dartmouth. Now they have to go out and win them, though. That's one of their big troubles. But it doesn't feel like this is really setting up that we're going to see any sort of separation between 1 and 6 or 7 at this point. There's enough parity there and enough of a tightness, 5 points separating the top 7 teams. Not as tight as some leagues, but still I think that this is going to be a battle that you're going to have, maybe a good battle for whoever can win the regular season title, but then that battle for who is going to take the last bye in the ECAC, and then maybe another battle for who gets home ice in the first round. I don't think we're going to be in a position, though, where on the last night of the season we're saying, boy, we can get into 4th place and get a bye, or we could drop all the way down to 9th place and be on the road. I don't think it's that tight right now.
Looking at Hockey East, what a weekend for New Hampshire and Maine. Both of them have moved into real contention for the postseason in at-large in the pairwise. New Hampshire to 14th, Maine from the bottom 30 up to 17th. And how did they do it? New Hampshire had a 1-0 win and a 1-1 tie with number 7 UMass, and Maine 2 overtime wins at Boston College.
Unbelievable. I mean, Dave Hendricks and I pick this league every week. My record is a little bit above 500. I'm probably about 560 or 570 right now. And that's, not counting how bad of a week I had last weekend, because it was not a good weekend to be a top team in Hockey East. You've got to, BC gets swept. UMass, they lose and tie, and they score just 1 goal on the weekend. UMass Lowell, they lose and tie and score just 2 goals on the weekend. It's just a nightmarish scenario. But you mentioned UNH. We've been talking about them, that they've been trending up. They've been playing really well at home. They go on the road and get that 1-0 win on Friday night. They come back home. They have a 1-0 lead late in regulation before UMass is able to find the equalizer. And then UNH had some good opportunities to win that game in overtime. Both goaltenders had to play excellent down the stretch. But, UNH is now in a position that if the season ended today, they'd be in the NCAA tournament. When was the last time we were talking about that? I mean, we're going back, more than 5 years since they've been relevant in that picture. And the same can be said for Maine. I mean, really, since Red Gendron's been the coach, there hasn't been a team that has been close to the NCAA tournament. And here his club is after. Now, this is a Maine team, mind you. They had not won a league game on the road since October. And they went into one of the toughest buildings in the league, Boston College. The Eagles came into that last weekend with a just trying to pull it up here. They were 6-2 at home before last weekend, and they sweep them both nights, having to lead late, watching BC tie the game in the last 5 minutes. And the first night they did it with an extra attacker goal, and then somehow the Black Bears, resilient, find a way to win each night in overtime. I mean, that's something that you can really build some momentum in a season if you're the Black Bears. Now, they are still, with all that said, down in a position where they're tied for the final playoff spot with UConn. They've got some work still to do, and these two teams will actually play 2 more times this season. But it's one of those scenarios where nobody could have told me that Maine was going to sweep. Nobody could have told me that BU and UNH were going to take 3 out of 4 points from 2 nationally ranked teams last weekend. It just didn't make any sense. And because of that, we now have a Hockey East where first place and 9th place. So we're talking about the league champion and not making the playoffs are separated by 3 games.
That's crazy. And there's not a lot of hockey left to be played. Basically a month of regular season left. The other game the other series rather, to look at in Hockey East had UMass Lowell scoring 2 goals on the second night to get a tie with BU, but a 5-0 loss on Friday night. And I guess there was a bit of controversy with that. There was a contact to the head major in the third period. 3 of those goals for BU came on that power play. But what went on there?
It was a nothing game going to the third, and BU gets their first goal on a good break. A harmless shot from center ice that Tyler Wall, an excellent goaltender, just kind of stuck to the wrong part of the ice. He threw it into a corner where his defenseman couldn't get it. BU ends up with it, a 3-on-1 down low, and they score. But then a power play for BU, and during that power play, Connor Sodergren kind of launched himself at a player. I still haven't seen a clear replay, but the officials did go to the video review. They deemed it a 5-minute major. During that, the ability for BU's power play just to strike, and they can be good when they are, and they're very potent when they get going. They score 3 on that. They get another power play late. They score another one. Next thing you know, a 0-0 game through 2 ends up 5-0. A totally different game on Saturday night. Lowell dictated the tempo more in Saturday's game, and they had a 2-1 lead into the final 2.5 minutes before BU was able to tie it, and some great overtime opportunities for the Riverhawks, but they end up with just a tie on the weekend. And they've slipped out of the position in the pairwise. They are no longer in a position where they would make the tournament if the season ended today. They're going to have to do some work to get in. But they've held themselves, with everything that, you think if you're Lowell, if you're going to the weekend sitting in 4th place, and if you don't win games, with the, UMass playing UNH, okay, maybe you can get some, but BC is going to take points from Maine. Providence, thankfully, was idle, but you're thinking if you don't get at least 3 points out of the weekend, if you're Lowell, you're going to be losing ground. They did not lose an ounce of ground. Or actually, I guess they lost 1. No, they didn't lose any ground to UMass at all because both teams had 1 point. They actually gained ground on Boston College and Providence. I mean, it was just one of those weekends that is almost undescribable. It was an upside-down weekend in Hockey East, a crazy one for sure.
In Atlantic hockey, a couple of teams missed opportunities to gain ground. A rare situation, 5 weekend sweeps. Holy Cross swept Air Force at home, and Niagara swept Army at home. Army could have been all by itself in first place, stays in third place. Bentley was on the road at Mercyhurst, swept. AIC swept at Robert Morris. That puts the Yellow Jackets in a tie with Sacred Heart for first place, but AIC with a game in hand. And RIT sweeping home and home with Canisius. That puts RIT in a 3-way tie for 4th place with Air Force and Robert Morris, but RIT has 2 games in hand. So things are very tight in Atlantic hockey. And just a note on the RIT weekend, it was a special game on Saturday night. The members of the 2010 Frozen Four team were invited back to campus. There was a whole day of activities for them. Huge lines for their autographs. People were bringing their 2010 Frozen Four tickets and old T-shirts and hats from that time to get autographed. And so a big deal before the game. But at the second intermission, RIT was down 4-1, including giving up a goal with about 19 seconds left in the second period. I had the opportunity at that game to interview current UMass associate head coach Jared DeMichael, who was the goaltender for that RIT team. And he's saying, it's not looking very good here. Well, with 8:22 left in the game, RIT put together 3 quick goals, a tap in across the front of the net, a seeing eye shot from the boards, and a fat, juicy rebound. 3 goals in 94 seconds. That tied a school record for scoring 3 goals. That record was set against New Hampshire in the Albany Regional by that 2010 Frozen Four team. And then less than 2 minutes later, a game-winning goal on a breakaway scored by number 10. So everybody felt like there was a lot of magic going on at that game. But really interesting situation. Nice to see all the guys from that team and a great atmosphere there. But Atlantic hockey is looking to really be a jumble. And we're going to talk about the Connecticut Ice Festival in a little bit that Sacred Heart won. The commentators in that tournament on TV were saying, Sacred Heart, they get to the NCAA playoffs, they're going to do some damage. Well, A, that's not unusual for that league, and B, Sacred Heart's got to get past the other teams in the league because they're not going to get in as an at-large. Even with the wins this weekend, they're still at the 30 spot or so in the pairwise. But that's going to be a fun one getting down to the wire in that league.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, obviously, great comeback for RIT you mentioned, but AIC, they took advantage of the weekend, moving into a tie with an idle team in Sacred Heart. Army, though, is the questionable. How the heck did that happen? I mean, they faced a Niagara team that had just 4 league wins coming into the weekend, just 4 wins overall coming into the weekend. And to drop 2, it had my head shaking just to see that one. But we've seen it before where Jason Lammers and his club have played some spoilers late in the season. And here they are in a position to do that again. And they did exactly that to Army. So it's kind of a missed opportunity there. You can say the same maybe for Air Force. But for Army, you just felt like this was going to be the weekend. You get a couple of wins. You know that'll put you into first place all by yourself. But now you're chasing, and now it's going to be a lot more difficult for Army to get into that top spot. AIC, though, they have defined the fact that they are in a battle with Sacred Heart. AIC still has the game in hand over the Pioneers. So it will be a good race for all the positions, the buys, the home ice in the first round, and obviously the overall championship in Atlantic hockey. This is not a runaway like it was a year ago. And
with Niagara, I think the answer is the way they played this past weekend is what we expected out of the Purple Eagles. They have really underachieved this season based on last season, based on the talent, and based on the expectations the coaches had in the preseason. Well, why don't we turn to the non-conference schedule first before we get to the Connecticut Ice Festival. Arizona State and Clarkson, 2 overtime splits, two overtime games, a split on the weekend. Clarkson winning 2-1 on Friday, 3-2 Arizona State on Saturday. Pretty much what you'd expect.
I mean, certainly these are 2 very good teams. We knew that, Clarkson, to get that early win and know that you're in a position to sweep. Maybe it might feel a little bit painful that you weren't able to get the sweep out of the weekend. For Arizona State, you know what you just salvaged. We've talked about this, really since December, that Arizona State is in a position if they win certain games, and they have a number of games, it's either 6 or 8 down the stretch against Atlantic hockey teams. You got to win those games. They took care of 2 against RIT already. They've got a few more left. But then we mentioned certain games, and we looked at this series against Clarkson that if you get a win there, you're putting yourself in better position. Arizona State now 11th in the pairwise. It's hardly solid ground. Trust me. Minnesota Duluth is 3/10,000ths of a point in back of Arizona State. Northeastern not much further in back of that. There's a lot of tightness really between 10 and 16, 17 in the pairwise right now. So it's not a comfortable position, but, by getting that win on Saturday night, even more than a tie, the fact that you got an overtime victory, that's going to help Arizona in their positioning for the pairwise. And, an at-large bid is not a sure thing, but it feels a lot better today than maybe it did Saturday morning after Friday's loss.
There was also a non-conference tilt with 2 ECAC teams, Rensselaer and Union, in the Mayor's Cup at the Time Union Center. The Engineers got the trophy for the first time since 2016 in a shootout.
Yeah, good for them. I mean, I don't know that there was a clear favorite going into this. You would have probably thought that RPI had the angle. They've been playing better hockey than Union. But, these are the games that you mark on your calendar. They're your rivalries. And I don't think this is as heated a rivalry as it once was when there were some different coaching personalities behind the benches. But still, you want these wins. And for RPI and David Smith, I'm glad to see that they get that trophy. It's been a while. So anytime you can knock off your rival, shootout, regulation, overtime, whatever it takes, take that trophy and enjoy it.
And then there was the Connecticut Ice Festival, the inaugural at Webster Bank Arena, coincided with the announcement of a brand new arena on campus for Sacred Heart. They were playing at Webster Bank, where Sacred Heart plays their home games. Sacred Heart, they were, I'm listening to the announcers and the commentators, and all along they're talking about Sacred Heart as being this, not in so many words, but like they were the weak sister and the surprise and all. They came out and put on 4 goals on Corbin Kaspersky for Yale, chased him out of the net. Now, he did come back on Sunday and get the win over UConn for Yale, but Sacred Heart showed everybody what they're made of, and then they put 3 quick goals together in the second period on Sunday in the championship game over Quinnipiac, added an empty netter late, but a big tournament win there for Sacred Heart, and if they make it through Atlantic Hockey, they're going to be a very dangerous team. They remind me a bit of Arizona State in their ability to attack and score in bunches. They've got a top line that can really put some numbers together. We talked last week in the Game of the Week podcast about Jason Cotton and what an impact he would be. And he was the MVP of the tournament, and he had a goal and an assist in both games. So a strong win there. A good comeback for Yale, a disappointing weekend for UConn. And I'm sure Quinnipiac has got to feel bad about that championship game where they let their guard down a couple of times and let guys get open with grade A chances.
Yeah, I had a tweet last night kind of late after this tournament ended, and I went back to 2013, and a lot of people for Yale and Quinnipiac have great memories of that season. Obviously, Yale, the national championship, Quinnipiac, they were the runners-up. They met in the title game of that, and that was probably the height of hockey for Connecticut when you really think about it. But the offset of that always was the fact that of the 59 teams that season, the 59th team in the pairwise in the RPI was Sacred Heart, dead last. And there were some pretty lean years there under CJ Maritolo, and somehow that team has found a way to turn it around. They didn't fire their coach. They stuck with their coach. You can go back to the following season, October the next year. They're opening the season against the number 1 team in the country, which at the time was UMass Lowell, and they beat the Riverhawks on opening night. And I'm not saying that was the turning point. There's been a lot of tough moments since then, but it feels that Sacred Heart has almost methodically built and quickly, in my opinion, quickly in 6 years, gone from one of the worst teams in the country, the worst team in the country in the 2012-13 seasons, to be one of the better teams in the country. I'm not going to say that they belong in the top 10 right now. They've got some work still to do. Because of the overall strength of Atlantic Hockey right now, despite having a 16-8-2 mark, they're still 30th in the pairwise. They're not going to make up that ground, as you mentioned. But boy, is this a great progression for Sacred Heart. Now, to know that you're going to build an on-campus arena, that was announced last, I believe it was Thursday or Friday. Big news. I mean, that's monumental for this program. It's monumental for Atlantic Hockey as well to have another new on-campus building to join the buildings like the Gene Polisani Center and the Bentley Arena. These are big moments for these schools and for this league. And I think it's just showing the upward trajectory for all of Atlantic Hockey. They've done so much over the years to build, and Sacred Heart's a great story.
And I think the progression of Sacred Heart is parallel to that of American International, last year's big story. They did bring in a new coach after Gary Wright retired at AIC when they brought in Eric Lang, but both schools moved out of substandard community rinks into AHL buildings and really created a much better atmosphere for fans and student athletes, and that's been a big part of it. And also Atlantic Hockey's moved to 18 scholarships. You may still be 5 years away from Atlantic being on a par with the other leagues, but the trajectory is there.
Yeah, it certainly is. And you mentioned it. The buildings have been a big step. It was hard to recruit into a place like the Milford Ice Pavilion down in Connecticut where Sacred Heart was playing. It's still not the easiest thing, I think, to recruit into a building that you don't own. It's not really right next to campus. You have to travel to it every day, but it's a lot better. And now know that you're going to be recruiting into an on-campus building within the next 3 to 4 years, that's another big step. And AIC, obviously, they've taken that step too. They got out of a really bad youth hockey rink into a very very good Mass Mutual center that like you said, housed an AHL team as well. So I love the way this league is going. I love the positive steps they take. I love when they get big wins and big moments like they did this weekend, the Connecticut Ice Classic.
And a closed circuit message to our friends at Arizona State. Sacred Heart's going to have this arena open in 2022. Time to get moving. You need this. You need this to happen. You have a great program. Get your building.
Yeah, that's very true. And there's a few schools out there. UConn goes into this as well, that they've, talked about building the on-campus arena. Well, they have one now, but they're going to improve upon a new arena. Arizona State, the money keeps being allotted. You keep hearing about it, but there's no shovels in the ground. And if Sacred Heart is able to beat you in that category, that's when you start having some concern. Yes, private versus public, and there's a big difference there when you're talking about public dollars, taxpayer dollars paying for it as opposed to private dollars like it would be at a school like Sacred Heart. But you're right, you do have to kind of take notice that it can be done in a short-term scale. And because of that, if you don't keep up, you're going to fall behind.
Well, that'll do it for this week's Weekend Review podcast. We've been sponsored by the 2020 NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit. For tickets, visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.